History hides horrors that make modern imagination shiver. From the courts of emperors to the shadows of battlefields, humans invented ways to punish, control, and terrify. Some of the most extreme involved castration. Soldiers, slaves, servants, and even rivals were subjected to unimaginable fates, often as a demonstration of power or a twisted form of justice. In this story, we'll reveal 7 methods so brutal they left marks not only on the body but on history itself. The blood, fear, and screams from centuries ago echo through time. And the reasons behind these acts are as shocking as the acts themselves. Throughout history, power has often been measured not just by armies and wealth, but by the control one could exert over the bodies of others. Castration, the deliberate removal of reproductive organs, became one of the darkest tools in this arsenal, a method to punish, humiliate, or control. Across centuries and continents, from the opulent courts of emperors to the blood-soaked battlefields of conquest, castration was used to instill fear, consolidate power, and enforce obedience. In ancient China, young boys were castrated to serve as eunuchs in imperial palaces. They were stripped of their manhood but elevated to positions of immense influence, serving as confidants and gatekeepers, yet living lives forever marked by their sacrifice. In Rome, slaves, prisoners, and rival combatants often faced castration as punishment, a brutal reminder of their status and vulnerability. The motives behind these acts were as varied as they were sinister. Sometimes it was political, a rival's threat, eliminated by destroying his ability to sire heirs. Sometimes it was religious, part of a ritual or vow to demonstrate devotion. In other cases, it was purely practical, ensuring loyalty by making individuals dependent on those who controlled their lives. Across cultures, the act was rarely private. It was a spectacle, a warning, a statement of power. Despite the horror, some who survived found unexpected agency. Eunuchs, in Ottoman and Chinese courts, for instance, wielded significant influence, demonstrating that even acts intended to destroy could inadvertently create new forms of power. Yet for every rare success, countless others endured unimaginable pain and lifelong suffering, reduced to shadows of the people they once were. This story will take you through 7 of the most terrifying methods of castration in history. Each technique reveals not only the cruelty humans can inflict on one another, but also the lengths societies have gone to enforce hierarchy, obedience, and fear. It is a tale of terror, endurance, and the haunting echoes of power, reminding us that history's darkest acts often leave the deepest marks. History has a way of hiding its darkest secrets in plain sight, and few are more horrifying than the methods humans devised to castrate one another. These acts were not random. They were calculated, ritualized, and designed to terrorize. One of the earliest methods involved the blade. A sharp knife, a sword, or a dagger was used with brutal precision. In ancient Rome and the Middle East, slaves and prisoners faced this method as punishment or intimidation. The act was swift, yet the terror leading up to it was often prolonged. Victims were bound, stripped of hope, and left to confront the inevitability of their fate. Another method used fire and boiling liquids. In some courts, hot irons or boiling water were employed to destroy the reproductive organs and cauterize the wound. The pain was unimaginable, yet the spectacle reinforced control over those deemed powerless. The scream of a single victim could echo across corridors, reminding others of the consequences of disobedience. In other cases, herbs and chemicals were employed, often over weeks or months. Certain poisons or plant extracts were given to suppress sexual function permanently. Though less immediate, the psychological torment waiting for the body to fail, knowing that every sip brought irreversible damage, was equally horrifying. Some cultures relied on mechanical pressure. Ropes, weights, or metal contraptions applied tension until tissue was crushed or ripped. The sheer ingenuity of these devices underscores the cruelty of those who designed them, turning the human body into an instrument of fear. On battlefields, blades were used as tools of humiliation, not just death. Rivals or captured enemies were castrated as trophies, a visual display of dominance intended to strike fear into others. The act became both punishment and statement, an unmistakable mark of defeat. Palaces and imperial courts often saw ritualized castration for service. Young boys, chosen for their loyalty or beauty, underwent the procedure to become eunuchs. They were trained, educated, and elevated to positions of influence. Yet their lives were forever defined by the trauma inflicted upon them. Finally, some methods involved twisting and tension. The victim's organs were bound and pulled until they tore, a process designed to maximize pain and terror. It was not merely an act of control. It was a demonstration of how far rulers and captors would go to assert dominance. Each of these methods, while varied in technique, shares a single thread: the human desire to control, punish, and dominate. And as we explore these 7 methods in detail, the pattern emerges. Cruelty was rarely senseless. It was a tool, a message, a means to ensure obedience through fear. The true horror of castration in history lies not only in the methods themselves, but in the aftermath of psychological torment, the societal consequences, and the enduring marks left on victims and witnesses alike. By the time the act was complete, the body had been transformed. But the mind, the identity, and the sense of self were forever altered. Imagine a young boy in the imperial palace of China, chosen for his youth and obedience. He had been groomed for a life of service, yet no preparation could shield him from the moment when his organs were removed. The procedure was swift, practiced, and ritualized. Yet the screams that echoed off the stone walls were raw, human, and unforgettable. By the end, he was no longer the boy who had walked into the chamber. He was a eunuch, a tool of the emperor, stripped of the future he had imagined, forced into a life that demanded obedience and silence. Yet paradoxically, this same boy might rise to immense power, overseeing treasures, secrets, and lives, proving that even in destruction, influence could survive. In other contexts, the consequences were immediate and devastating. Prisoners of war subjected to battlefield castration faced not only pain, but humiliation in front of peers, a permanent mark of defeat that extended far beyond the flesh. Entire communities could witness the act as a warning, instilling fear and enforcing obedience through terror. A single castration could ripple through society, reinforcing hierarchies, deterring rebellion, and shaping generations. Even in Europe and the Middle East, castration as punishment was both a physical and symbolic tool. Those who transgressed social norms, violated authority, or challenged rulers could be permanently removed from society's expectations of manhood. The procedure was intended to erase their ability to reproduce. But its symbolic weight was far greater. It was a complete severing of identity, of status, and of perceived masculinity. The act told not just the victim, but all who observed. Power resides in the hands of those who control life and death. Some of the most terrifying instances were ritualized in imperial or religious courts. Boys and men, sometimes chosen for beauty or family status, were made eunuchs under the guise of service. Yet what awaited them was a lifetime of disorientation and psychological struggle. They became trusted advisors, wielding influence unimaginable for those who had not suffered such mutilation. And yet, their very power was inseparable from their trauma. A constant reminder that the cost of loyalty was the destruction of one's own body and reproductive potential. The methods themselves amplified this horror. Blades, boiling water, crushing devices, or chemical potions ensured that survival was rare and suffering unavoidable. Each technique was designed not merely to punish the flesh, but to imprint terror on the mind and on anyone who witnessed it. Even those who escaped death were never untouched, both physically and psychologically scarred for life. But perhaps the most chilling aspect is how normalized these acts became in some societies. Castration was not always an anomaly or a secret. It was a tool, codified in law, celebrated in ritual, and recorded in history. The echoes of pain, fear, and obedience shaped societies in subtle yet profound ways. Empires relied on these acts to maintain order, to control succession, to manipulate the very nature of loyalty and service. And yet, in the midst of this darkness, there were threads of paradoxical power. Survivors, particularly eunuchs, who rose in imperial courts, demonstrated resilience, cunning, and influence beyond what many kings and rulers commanded. Their bodies were altered, but their minds adapted. Their trauma became a lens through which they navigated the treacherous waters of politics, sometimes becoming the most feared figures in the empire. The climax of this story, then, is not just the act of castration itself, but its consequences, the interweaving of cruelty, power, and survival. Across civilizations, across centuries, the same fundamental dynamic recurred: the destruction of the body as a demonstration of power, the shaping of society through terror, and the survival of those who endured, whose stories continue to haunt history. When we recount the 7 methods, the blade, boiling liquids, chemicals, crushing devices, battlefield mutilation, ritualized palace procedures, and tension techniques, we are not merely exploring macabre practices, we are tracing a pattern of human cruelty and resilience, showing how terror has been wielded as a tool of control, and how even in the darkest circumstances, survival and influence were possible. The echoes of screams, the scars on flesh and soul, and the ripples through history form the true climax. These acts were horrifying, yet they shaped societies, defined loyalties, and created paradoxical legacies of power. The darkest methods became instruments of social engineering, showing that human cruelty, when institutionalized, leaves marks far beyond the immediate victims. And as the history of these acts unfolds, one chilling truth remains: in the pursuit of control, humans devised horrors that transcended the physical, imprinting fear, obedience, and trauma into generations, shaping societies in ways that still reverberate through history. The history of castration is more than a series of gruesome acts. It is a story about power, fear, and the human capacity for both cruelty and resilience. Across civilizations, these methods were never random. They were tools meticulously designed to enforce obedience, demonstrate dominance, and control the lives of others. Yet the impact went far beyond the immediate victims. Survivors of castration, particularly those in palace or imperial settings, often wielded a paradoxical power. In China, Ottoman Empire, and parts of the Middle East, eunuchs rose to positions of influence, acting as advisors, gatekeepers, and trusted confidants to rulers who had attempted to erase their identities. They were living reminders that even acts meant to destroy could create unexpected forms of authority. Their existence challenged the assumptions of power. A mutilated body could still house a brilliant mind, capable of shaping kingdoms and histories, but for the majority, the consequences were devastating. Lives were scarred, identities fractured, and bodies forever altered. Families and communities were forced to witness acts meant to terrorize and teach obedience. Fear became woven into the fabric of society, demonstrating that control is as much about psychology as it is about physical domination. Every ritual, every brutal method was a lesson that survival depended on submission. Castration also left its mark on culture and politics. It influenced succession, determined who could hold power, and created social hierarchies based on the body itself. The psychological trauma of victims, whether silent servants in courts or prisoners on battlefields, shaped how societies viewed obedience, loyalty, and gender. Fear became a currency, and control over the most intimate aspects of human life became a tool for rulers to solidify authority. Yet history also shows resilience. Those who survived, endured, and sometimes even thrived remind us that the human spirit can persist under extreme oppression. The very acts designed to erase them sometimes amplified their agency, granting them positions and respect unimaginable before their suffering. This duality, the horror of the act and the power of survival, is what makes the history of castration both terrifying and strangely instructive. As we look back, the lesson is clear. Cruelty, when institutionalized, leaves more than physical scars. It shapes societies, influences politics, and defines cultural norms. But human resilience can turn even the darkest acts into legacies of endurance, influence, and memory. The echoes of these horrors remind us how far power can stretch, but also how the human will can persist, adapt, and resist. So when we recount the 7 terrifying methods of castration, the blade, boiling liquids, chemicals, crushing devices, battlefield mutilation, palace rituals, intention techniques, we are witnessing history's most extreme intersections of pain, control, and survival. They are not merely stories of horror. They are reflections on the lengths humans have gone to dominate one another and the remarkable strength of those who endured. The question lingers, heavy and rhetorical, as history often leaves it. If such cruelty was once considered acceptable, what does it say about power, fear, and our responsibility to remember? History has recorded the scars, the screams, and the survival. And in remembering, we confront the darkest parts of human nature and perhaps ensure they are never repeated.